This is Author Mastery Insights. I am incredibly excited for this conversation with an amazing chiropractor, incredible chiropractic historian and servant to our profession, Dr. Steve. Welcome, brother. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. For those not familiar with the incredible contribution to our profession, and I could use the entire time of this interview sharing his contributions. I am going to keep it simple because one, incredible humble man in front of us, but also an amazing impact. A 1987 graduate of Palmer College of Chiropractic, has published well in excess of 50 scholarly articles and many other industry articles in relation to chiropractic history and biomechanics, as well as contributing chapters to 4 published books, and he has written 7 of his own, including, we're going to talk about this one today, Finding Langworthy, The Quest to Discover the Life and Times of a Chiropractic Pioneer. Incredible background, editorial board for the Journal of Contemporary Chiropractic at Parker, the secretary of the board of directors for the Association of the History of Chiropractic, editor-in-chief for the History Association for the History of Chiropractic, editorial board for Chiropractic Economics, Chiropractor of the Year Award from Chiropractic Biophysics, and has also served as Secretary and Director of Chiropractic Biophysics, amongst many, many, many other accolades. An incredible scholar, amazing historian, profound chiropractor, and author serving our profession. Dr. Steve, thank you for all you have done, your incredible service and contribution, and to bring history to life. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very nice. I'm kind of embarrassed now.
Well, as I said, I think there's so much you've done, so much you've contributed. We are grateful. I want to talk today. I mean, we could talk about any of your books because they hold so much for the chiropractor. This one here really excited me because Finding Langworthy, we know and understand the importance and role of chiropractic history, but many of the pioneers haven't got their own expression within books. They have been discussed, they have been, written about, not all accurately, not all reflected as they should be necessarily. But you have gone in an incredible depth to seek out one person in particular within this book. Share with us a little bit about the book before we even talk about Langworthy himself.
Well, the book is the culmination of decades of me collecting Langworthy paraphernalia, Langworthy articles, Langworthy personal letters. So this book has been floating around in my head for a couple of decades. And I just decided finally that I was going to sit down and assemble it all together in one place so that if anybody was interested in learning about Langworthy, they wouldn't have to go through this sort of tortuous journey to try and piece together all the things that exist in various places throughout chiropractic, but now they're all assembled in one place, including at the end of the book. I have like an appendix of all an assorted number of articles and advertisements and things that don't appear anywhere else except in the original sources, where you have to go and dig them out from newspapers and things of that nature. So that's where it came from. It came out of a 20-year sojourn, better than 20-year sojourn, to learn about this very interesting character.
He's an interesting character, and we're going to talk about that character. I'm just going to show some of the pages, like the way you put it together. You've got original documentation in there. You've got beautiful photos that highlight the different characters. I mean, it's just beautifully presented. It brings together the history, and you've got the explanatory text as well that starts to really bring together not just this man, but also the times and the people at that time and the story of chiropractic. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about the chiropractic story that revolved around Langworthy, because there may be some people watching this that are not even familiar with the name Langworthy, who are not immersed in chiropractic history, and they may know there's DD, there's BJ, then there's a big gap to some of the chiropractors like Reggie Gold or Sid Williams, and then there's people of today, and there isn't necessarily that depth of understanding, that immersion in our incredible history. So this may be a revelation for some people, and in fact, it may be an awakening for others who have read of or heard of Langworthy, but haven't known the true story. So can you share with us a little bit about this remarkable chiropractor in his times?
Sure. He was a man that came from a leading family in Dubuque, Iowa, and he was originally a salesman. He worked not only as an itinerant salesman in the Northwest. He started a shoe company. He had an insurance agency in Iowa, and ultimately decided that he wanted to go into healthcare. So he took a correspondence course in osteopathy, and then from there traveled to Davenport, Iowa, where he enrolled at the Palmer School and received his chiropractic diploma under D.D. Palmer. After graduating from the Palmer School, he then went to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and established his own practice, and he built a thriving practice as well as a company that produced various pieces of chiropractic equipment like adjusting tables, traction units, and he started the first incorporated school of chiropractic known as the American School of Chiropractic and Nature Cure right there in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And he would become really sort of a thorn in the side of the Palmers, and many chiropractic historians think that his greatest contribution was that he pushed the Palmers to up their game, basically. And I would agree with that predominantly. That was his greatest role. Although he had a bunch of his own contributions as well. And I became interested in him and his contributions because I was serving as an intern at the office of Dr. Richard Burns when I was a student at Palmer College. And Dr. Burns told me about Langworthy many, many, many years ago, back in 1986, probably. And then through a series of bizarre coincidences, I started to get things about Langworthy. I mean, I'm not a very spiritual person, but there are too many coincidences in this story that this guy isn't somehow directing stuff to me from beyond the grave. And that sounds crazy. Anybody that knows me and knows me as a scientific clinician would think, how's that coming out of Steve's mouth? But it's just a fact, a crazy fact.
It's interesting. One, you've written a book and you've shared some information about him. And oftentimes on Author Master Insight, we speak about the significance of chiropractors writing books, their role of writing books to serve the chiropractic mission, to educate our patients and community and bring a greater awareness to the world. But Langworthy, yourself, myself, have all written books. So tell me about Langworthy's book as well, because that is instrumental in the chiropractic history. And again, may have been one of those things to push the Palmers as well.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you're referring to the first chiropractic textbooks, Modernized Chiropractic, which was written by 3 authors. Oakley Smith was the first author. He wrote the vast majority of that book. Langworthy was the second author. He certainly wrote the portions of the book that were about traction. And traction, as Langworthy described it, was really, it was not a modality as we think of traction today. It was basically a way to apply forces to the spine over a longer period of time than an adjustive thrust, which we know from scientific studies. When you do it with your hands, it takes about 1/10 of a second to apply that force. If you use an adjusting instrument like an activator, that takes 1/100th of a second. But that is not an appropriate force to get some of the corrections that he hoped to get in patient spines. And so he recognized through his study, along with Oakley Smith, that forces over an extended period of time were needed to be applied in order to get correction to the spine. And so the only way to do that would be with a sustained force. And he developed traction methods. But one way to look at that is not as a modality of traction, but as really like an adjusting instrument. The force was just applied over 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. So he wrote those portions of Modernized Chiropractic. he was the man with the money behind that project. So he was also the publisher and the copyright holder of Modernized Chiropractic. Oakley Smith was a young man who was D.D. Palmer's probably greatest protege. He had a falling out with D.D. Palmer. He ended up working with Langworthy because Langworthy was organized, ambitious, successful, really all the kinds of things that, frankly, D.D. Palmer wasn't. He wasn't particularly organized. I mean, he could be, but in terms of his business dealings and his personal dealings, he wasn't particularly organized in how he dealt with those things. And Smith, being more of a scientist, found appeal with the Langworthy sort of branch of chiropractic, and that's how he ended up in Cedar Rapids as a co-author on Modernized Chiropractic, as well as a teacher in Langworthy's school. So there is some controversy about whether or not these are the first books in chiropractic. I don't really think it matters. These are the first textbooks in chiropractic. If you wanted to teach chiropractic, the 2-volume set of Modernized Chiropractic could be used as textbooks in a classroom, as opposed to the Palmer book that came out around the same time in 1906. It's kind of a show and tell book. It's not really a textbook that you would teach chiropractic principles and practice out of. And so to characterize Modernized Chiropractic as the first textbooks in chiropractic is absolutely accurate.
It's just interesting that, you know, he, again, as you said, he challenged the Palmers to elevate their game to, while there was conflict, you know, steel is strengthened against steel. And so we need those people around us to grow us, to challenge us. So you spoke about your journey in writing the book. What was the motivation for getting it out into print? It's an incredible story. It encapsulates beautifully Langworthy and the chiropractic history of the time. Why did you feel it was so necessary to get it into print?
Okay, so although I am a chiropractic historian, reading history can be incredibly boring. Most historical books are mostly a recitation of names and dates and events. And I wanted to write a book about Langworthy that was different from most chiropractic history books. I think I'm a pretty good storyteller. So I wanted to put it in language that was like, you're sitting around the campfire and I'm telling you a story about this guy's life. And intertwined in that, I put 5 chapters in there that talk about these bizarre coincidences that put documents and other things in my pathway so that I could write a book about Langworthy. And so I think it's a book that's very different from most chiropractic history books, because it's an easy, I believe, very entertaining read. I've even had my own patients, you know, I have a few copies sitting around in my office, and patients will pick it up and look at it and go, "What's this about?" And I go, "It's a book that I wrote about an early chiropractor. I have some, you know, of his ads hanging on the wall in my office." And a few of them have gone, "Oh, can I read this?" And I'm like, "Well, sure, you're welcome to read that if you'd like, but I don't know why you'd be interested in the topic." And oddly enough, they've actually read it and come back and told me that they really enjoyed it because it's just an interesting story. And so I wanted to tell the story of Langworthy, but I wanted to tell it in a way that was accurate, but also an entertaining read. And I think I have accomplished that.
You no longer need to think whether that is or is not the case. I can confirm unequivocally that it is a very accessible book. It is filled with stories, that your commentaries in there, at times lighthearted, but simultaneously, as you said, with story, but then they also bind together the historical information that you have in there. And I think it is a great read. I think every chiropractor should read this one, not only from a historical perspective and immersing yourself in the history, but because the stories there evoke a sense of appreciation and even gratitude, not just for your writings, but for what your writings tell us about our history. And And I think it is a wonderful gift, and I just want to acknowledge and appreciate you for that, so that you can dispel any thoughts and just say with absolute concreteness, it was a great contribution.
Well, thank you. You know, another thing that I wanted to do in telling this story was I wanted to humanize all of the characters in the story. Much of chiropractic history is mostly, the word is called hagiography. It's where our early chiropractic pioneers are canonized as saints. And they weren't saints. They did great things, but they were very human individuals with all the same faults and frailties that all humans had. And so I wanted to write the story that pointed out the great things that our early chiropractors did, but also point out that they weren't saints. They had faults and frailties. I mean, D.D. Palmer, you know, for all the great things that he did, he was a bit of a scoundrel. He skipped out of town on all of his debts. He left them for his son to have to pay. To his son's great credit, he made good on those debts, but his son could be a serial liar. He had his own faults and frailties, and Langworthy himself, he was no saint. I mean, he was ambitious. He could be greedy. He was an adulterer. Those are not the best ways to describe people, but if it's true, it's true.
What I like about that, and I reflected a lot on your writings, and we had a couple of conversations really online. And the deeper I thought about that, I think humanizing people is a really important aspect, because one, we can, as you said, canonize our chiropractic pioneers. And I think there is good reason to do that. However, oftentimes it can have the impact that the chiropractor today, with all of their own foibles and human weaknesses, can feel like the vision of chiropractic held by the pioneers is inaccessible, because, well, we aren't greater larger than life, really, is how I would then say that. We're not larger than life people, so we can't create a larger than life impact that our pioneers have. But in reality, when you uncover this true aspect of their character, their personality, you start to realize, well, okay, they were just normal people like me that maybe expressed their passions more fervently than I did, because they had more compulsion, not for any other reason than they had the compulsion and they acted on that. So this humanizing brings them closer to us in a way that maybe allows us then to access our own strengths, not focus on our failings or weaknesses, that can therefore elevate us, our impact and our service and contribution. And then when we look at people like you and the contribution you've made, we realize we all have our faults, but if we look at our strengths and contribute by those strengths, we can serve at a more profound and powerful level. Would that be a reasonable way of assessing the way you've story told and characterized these people, to give us hope in the present for what the possibility we can create now and for the future?
I think that's a very fair way to characterize what I've written. And to maybe punctuate that a little bit, I have a chapter in the book where I believe that the chapter is titled "The Minnesota Licensing Debacle." And in that chapter, I talk about how Langworthy disciples basically were able to get a law in front of the Minnesota legislature to license chiropractic as a legal profession in the state of Minnesota. And that law was passed by both the Senate and the House of the legislature of Minnesota, and all it needed was a signature from the governor, and it would have made chiropractic a legal profession in the state of Minnesota. But D.D. Palmer didn't care for how chiropractic was codified in the law. It didn't fit the way he perceived chiropractic should be the scope of practice of chiropractic, basically. So he traveled to Minnesota. He petitioned the governor for a meeting with him. He met with the governor, and the governor refused to sign the bill. As a result of that, it would be almost a decade before the state of Kansas would pass a law licensing chiropractic as a legal profession. Now, we still have, that's our tradition of not getting along, of fighting amongst each other, is not a new thing. It goes all the way back to the early part of the profession. Can we learn something from that? If we were to speak to our legislatures with a unified voice. I mean, for example, I practice in the state of Illinois in the United States. We are blessed or cursed, however you want to look at it, with two chiropractic societies. We have a straight one and a mixer one. I'm probably the only chiropractor in the state that belongs to both of those chiropractic societies. And the truth of the matter is, the vast majority of chiropractors occupy the middle ground. They're not way to the right or way to the left. They're in the middle somewhere. And we confuse our legislators when a piece of legislation comes up and they get conflicting opinions. Whereas what we should do is both groups should get together and work out their problems and then speak with one voice to the legislature. We would accomplish so much more. But as chiropractors, we tend to be a little bit like classic Protestants and Catholics. Rather than celebrate the 95% that we have in common, we want to kill each other over the 5% that we don't have in common. That's why I told that story. We need to figure out how to make these things work in our profession. And I have used stories from the past to kind of illustrate some of our current difficulties.
Plum and Cleveland and Phillips came together to write a book, Chiropractic Peace, and what you're echoing the sentiments of that book is that there is universality amongst all chiropractors. Find what unites us. Recognize there'll be differences that we will always have, but speak the universal truth of chiropractic. As I finish up here, I think honestly I could speak with you for hours. I think you have such a great mind for chiropractic, and I love chiropractic history. What I love is that you were able to bring history to the pages. And as you said, many chiropractic history books are theoretical and recordings of information as opposed to stories about our history. I would love for chiropractors to go out there and write their book. And because you could write a book for your patients, you could write a book for the community, you could write a book for your colleagues or your peers. What's your message to chiropractors about recognizing no matter the choice they have before them, whether it's their science, their art, their philosophy, their history, or the political landscape of our profession, if they want to get their message out there and they aspire to share that message and put those words into print, what's your message for them?
My message would be start. Even though you may not be a very good writer at this point, if you don't put pen to paper or computer to screen, if you don't start somewhere, you'll never do it. And, the finished product does not come out in the first draft. As your brain crystallizes the things that you want to talk about, what you write will evolve, and you just have to keep working at it. But if you don't start, it's never, ever going to happen. So commit something either to your computer or to paper. However, I'm old school, I kind of like the old fashioned way, but if you don't start, you'll never finish.
You know what? You may not be a larger than life personality or character, but neither, as we have learned, are the people who've written our chiropractic textbooks, who have written our green books, and any other book written by any other chiropractor. They are no different to you, people with a mission and a purpose to take what they have in their heart and in their mind to put in print to serve humanity. Dr. Steve, very grateful for you, for your contribution, for your time. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate you.
Thank you.